7:02, and I'm going to call the planning board meeting to order of May 11th, 2020. We're here this evening to meet with the Department of Public Works and go over coordinating some of our working together on subdivisions and roads and sidewalks and et cetera, et cetera. So we want to put this in Dave's court first and let him, you want to?
Well, everybody has here in front of them, I believe, I emailed out the discussion items today, and I guess we probably should start with
Just going through the
DPW's
agenda.
concerns.
Sure. So,
Jane, can we introduce everybody first?
Sure,
Oh, all right.
that was Chris.
So I'm Christine O'Grady. I'm the Director of Planning.
John Souza, Planning Board member.
Dave Hickox, Director of Public Works.
Tim Barber, Senior Engineer, Department of Public Works.
Kevin Mello, Planning Board member.
Lori Ann Miller, Planning Board member.
Steve Taylor, Planning Board member.
Margaret Sweet, Planning Board member.
Paul Duart, Associate Engineer, DPW.
Did you say associate engineer? Okay, thank you.
All set?
How's that?
All right, so
Thank you, Christine. Thank you.
I see on Christine's agenda, we start with construction, installations and inspections for roadways, common driveways and private driveways, and aprons. So, you know, I guess all I can do is start by saying that DPW engineering, one of our functions, of many functions, is to inspect most construction that goes on that's related to utilities and roadways in town. Whether they're private, whether they're going to be public, or whether they're commercial. We're there because the utilities they install are ultimately, if they're not put in properly, ultimately cost the taxpayer and the users money. For instance, water, we need to be there whenever water's installed. Sewer, as important, we need to be there. And it's not just a matter of being there, but it's a matter of making sure that the products they're using, the procedures they're using, meet our specifications. And there are good contractors and bad contractors, so we need to be there. And then, so what we're seeing now, where I think there's some gray area, is that these OSRDs, private lanes, there's a question as to, you know, what's our jurisdiction? What should we be looking at? Again, we want to look at everything, not just water, not just, we want to look at drainage, because ultimately, you could have the best engineer design the best drainage system, but if it's not put in properly, number one, the residents who live in that area are going to see, you know, feel the problems, but number two, the DPW are the ones who get the call. They don't call the planning board when the drainage doesn't work, or they don't call conservation. They call DPW and they say, hey, my yard's flooding out. So it's really important we look at drainage as well. So when we start to look at private roads, there's been a question, you know, Tim and I and our staff have talked about it. We need to see everything that goes on. If it's an OSRD and someone's looking at it, what we keep hearing is, it's a driveway. You don't need to look at it, it's a driveway. We need to look at it. And of course, the concern we have at this point is we're seeing more gravel roads. And you can build a nice gravel road and it looks great, but you know, most of them, particularly if there's any runoff involved, within 6 months or a year, don't look like they looked when they were originally built. And what we see is people coming back to us, asking us, you know, what can we do? The developer's long gone. You have a half dozen families living on a private lane, and they're coming to us asking, how do we get our road paved? Because no one with a nice car wants to drive down a bumpy gravel road. So it's just something for the board to consider moving forward. Again, if
I'm
you
sorry,
want us to look at,
what do you want us to consider, Dave? I missed.
well, the concern we're seeing is more gravel lanes. I think there's been recent,
Oh, you're seeing more gravel lanes, and
yeah,
you'd
we're
like,
seeing more
you'd like to
being
see less of
approved
them.
by the board. And again, it's, these are all gonna be private, but I think I'm just looking out for the residents that are gonna live there eventually. We see them coming back to us asking, how do we get them paved? And on a couple of occasions, we've worked with them to get their private gravel lane paved. There's one, I recall, out on Gidley Town Road, another one up off of Reed Road. I think there was a third one, but, you know, it's something I think the board should consider. But to sum it up, we really need to look at everything. And, you know, if you do approve a gravel road, I see you have aprons here. We do need an adequate apron to protect the public road, so we're not dragging shells or stone or gravel out to the public travel way.
We usually put, what, a 6-foot apron?
20 feet.
Over 20 feet, huh?
20-foot apron, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, is that what you feel is adequate?
Which you
20
folks
foot? Okay.
approved when we adopted
Yeah,
that. Yeah, that
20
was adequate.
20 feet's fine.
20 feet
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
Okay.
The other issue that we see a lot with gravel roads, when residents get together in the subdivision and ask to pave it, normally the stormwater isn't designed for the runoff on a paved road. It's designed less because of the gravel. And when they pave it, sometimes it causes problems if it's sloping out to a public way.
Could I just jump in and echo that comment you just made? I think you just said something really important, and I want to make sure my fellow planning board colleagues really get it, that the impermeable surface needs a lot more runoff capability than the permeable surface. Your point about the gravel road is spot on, and so we should really think about the cost of these things.
Yeah, again, Dan, it's a different, drainage it tends to be a little bit larger dealing with storm drainage when you have pavement. And I think that's why a lot of times developers would prefer not to have paved ways, paved driveways, because the factors require less drainage. Ponds are smaller typically, you can get away with swales, things of that nature when you have a gravel way versus a paved way.
It all comes down to cost, the cost of the bituminous asphalt, the cost of the stormwater, and the installation.
John?
so I'm trying to understand where you're having the problem. So you said common driveways and inspection. So are you not inspecting common driveways now, or is there an issue with inspecting common driveways, or what? I'm trying to understand.
I think we're getting some pushback on, you know, how much we should be looking at private areas. Because they're not, from developers
From the
and
developers.
contractors.
Yep. So the only thing that we've always had, prior to OSIDs, obviously we're seeing more development, all development is going. The developers are choosing OSID, which I think is a good thing for the town. We'll discuss that later, but, when we look at the benefits we get with an OSID. So developers are using OSIDs, and OSIDs you can put common driveways, so you're seeing more of them. I don't know what the threshold is, will we allow gravel up to so many houses? There's a threshold that we wouldn't allow it. So with more of common driveways, we're seeing more gravel driveways, and it's clearly from the planning board's perspective, and at least the developer's perspective, is everybody's put on notice that that road can never become public, or unless you bring it up to town standards, which is now, unfortunately, that may not always get passed down from the developer to the person actually buying it. But how do we, how can we prevent that or lessen that impact? I don't know. But we've always, your issue of private drives, you want that in there. Even before OSIDs, we had roads and private roads. Private roads were the same thing. Private roads, some of them were gravel, some of them certainly didn't have to meet the standards. Those folks, we've operated like that for 40 years, where private lanes and drives, roads were allowed, but they were put on notice that if you want to make that a public road, you've got to bring it up to standard.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between what we were doing 20 years ago with a private road
Well, I think
versus
honestly,
a common
20 years
drive?
ago,
It's the same issue, isn't it?
my recollection of 20 years ago was there were very few, if any, that I recall,
Yeah, there's no doubt there were less of them.
gravel ways
Yes.
being approved by the town of Dartmouth.
Yeah, but isn't the real problem not the fact that the people want to get the roads approved? They know they're going to be private roads. The problem is that they now want to get these private roads paved. And because they want to get them paved, they don't meet the runoff standards. Am I correct in saying this is where the problem is? The problem falls in when all of a sudden you have four people who are willing to now pave that road.
But
But now we have a runoff
that's,
problem.
you know, I own a house that's got a 1,000-foot gravel driveway. If I want to pave that, I can do that. I don't have to meet any town standards or anything like that. So that's always going to exist. You're never going to prevent a
Yep.
private driveway from somebody wanting to pave it and then having to subsequently deal with the drainage issues. Now, obviously, again, we're seeing more of them, but I don't know how we get away from that.
Well, you may want to consider a limit. I mean, certainly if you have a 1 or a 2 lot OSRD, maybe that's in a certain area of
Well, which we
town,
do
it
now,
might
so
make
you're
sense.
asking that we tighten up that
back.
threshold, wherever it is now, I don't know if it's
I think it's
5.
4 or 5.
4 or 5 is allowed on a common driveway.
John, excuse me, could I weigh in here? I just want to second what Dave just said. It was really important that if you're absolutely correct that under the existing rules and the past rules, we have to approve a 1,000-foot driveway and so forth. But if we could limit them and approve less of them and not build them in the first place, the town would be better off.
Steve, let's not have that discussion now. We're having a discussion with the DPW.
Okay, I just
mean,
wanna make sure that
control and
everybody-
development is a whole nother issue.
I understand,
I'm
but
I'm
it's
trying to
not-
understand,
it's not
this is
irrelevant,
time
right?
with the
They're connected.
DPW. They're not saying,
connected.
stop development altogether. We're
No,
trying
no.
to work with them and figure out where the issues are and what we can do and improve or make it easy. So, you know, I don't know where the planning board would vote on if we did look at that threshold and lessening it. So the problem still never goes away. Instead of, you know, there'll still be common driveways just with 2 homes or 3 homes or whatever the threshold, new threshold may be if it changes at all. But the,
Honestly, and I don't think we didn't come here to get into a discussion on what you should or should not approve. That's really your business. Tim and I talked about that today. I think what we want to get across is that regardless of what it is, number one, if there are utilities involved, water, sewer, and drain, we need to be there. And then really the question I think that we should pose is, if there is a private gravel driveway, do we need to be there?
do you want to be there?
I feel an obligation to the buyers, you know, again, and there are areas, certainly, and one recently out at the end of Allen's Neck Road, you know, a very remote, private area. It was an old right-of-way established years ago. They did a wonderful job, and 20 years later, it still looked great. You know, those we probably don't need to be, but in general, if you're approving gravel ways, there should be a standard on how it's built.
So probably
To look out for the buyer.
Sure,
You know,
So the
we're not gonna
easiest
own it,
way
but just
that we
for the
could
buyer, for
probably
the
do
town.
that is that anything that requires an easement. So every common driveway has an easement. A private drive, a gravel drive to a single-family home doesn't have an easement. But when you've got a common drive,
Multiple, yep.
we don't approve that unless there's an easement. So the planning board, if it so chooses, could say any drive or any utility within an easement has to be inspected and approved by the DPW. And with a standard that we don't, I don't know if we have a standard for common driveways.
Yes and no.
I think we do. We got some kind
You
of
know,
standard. So you and
we do have some form of a standard. I think the question would come out is, you know, our inspector goes out to the site, the contractor is excavating, and the plan says you need to bring in 12 inches of gravel and maybe 4 inches of process on top to create a nice drive. But our inspector may go out there and look at what he dug down to and say, you know, that material's not suitable. You should really go down deeper until you get to a better material to build this road. And the contractor's, no, I don't need to do that. You know, it says 12 inches. So those are the type of things that our inspectors face, and, you know, we need some guidance on, you know.
Well,
You know, if the town is going to be responsible for inspecting the road. We just want to make sure we have the authority to.
Well, how's that handled now with so is that just specific to a common drive? Or is that specific to a new subdivision?
Well, if it was a new
with-
subdivision, they need to do inspections at the subgrade, so, they can dig, and if they're in poor material, and they have to go down 5 feet in an area because they came into
So in
peat or something, they have to take it out.
In the regs now, if they're building a road, that's gonna be public.
Our construction standards, yeah.
Your construction say,
Requires-
12 inches of gravel.
Yeah,
blah, blah,
requires
blah, blah.
inspections.
But if you hit poor material, you have to go even deeper.
Yeah, so we go out there and the materials, and they want to start to bring the gravel in, and the
Yeah.
material's not acceptable, we say, no, you gotta take out more.
Yeah.
So,
So-
but that's in our construction spec, we don't have that for gravel.
We do, I mean,
But not for gravel drives.
It's the
Well,
same
maybe
spec as a road,
Gravel drives.
except
We
for
should
the
have
addressing.
gravel drives.
But that's where the
Christine?
debate starts, is do we have authority to be dictating?
So that what we need to do is to give you the authority to.
Correct.
To make
Well,
sure the
and
gravel
get
roads are properly
standards,
built.
'cause we gotta rely on your construction standards, whatever that may be. But I also wanna look at is, well, ultimately, is the impact to a landowner and a future homeowner. One of the benefits of OSIDs is we're getting tons of open space, which is a huge benefit for the town. We're getting less pervious material, which many people consider a benefit for the town, and we're not getting gravel. So now, if we're adding pavement, we're adding more water into our ponds, lakes, streams, and ocean. But we're also driving up the costs of those lots when we do that. So we gotta look at the economic impact.
John, I have to second
Wait a
your
minute, Steve,
You're
I'm gonna have
absolutely
Christine
correct.
go. Christine had a question. Christine?
I didn't know if you wanted to have us change the regulation, if you want to put some type of a note in there, so you get more of an option to inspect when it's gravel, if you want.
I think if we're all on the same page, and we believe that we should be looking out to make sure a gravel road is built properly for the future lot owners,
Yeah.
that should be just something that we can put in your regulation, and we can amend our construction spec specifically for gravel ways, and then we make sure that that note's on the plan, because if you notice, all the DPW notes always refer back to our construction specifications, latest revision. We're in the process of updating those. We do it every year or two for material upgrades typically, but we can add that in and sort of clean that up.
So, John, to your issue,
The plan-
the developer is gonna save money if they do a subsurface. But in the long run, the homeowners are gonna spend more money if they have to now dig it all up and put a good subsurface and put better gravel. Or if they wanna have that road paved, they've gotta do the whole thing all over
And
again.
that's buyer
So-
beware. Some people choose to do that. Some people obviously know when they're going into it, that I'm buying a house on a gravel road. I understand there's gonna be more maintenance, but there's an environmental benefit to it, and there's an economic benefit to it. I'm not paying the cost of pavement and drainage. So they're getting a lot at a reduced cost. So there's a give and take there. And,
Do you see the-
right
do you
now,
see the
the
real estate
regulations
values?
provide flexibility.
Do you see the real estate values dropping for the houses that are on these common gravel drives?
I don't know to what percentage, but, there is I would think, if I'm a home buyer and I'm looking, that I'm gonna pay more money for a house that's on a paved road.
And that's a question for our
Now,
assessor.
there's a lot of factors that go into that, some of them are closer to schools, that may not be the same, some of them don't have sewer and water, so that, so there's a lot of factors that go
Yeah.
into that, but there's no question in my mind that, a homeowner is gonna pay more from a developer on a paved road with drainage, they've got to, Now, does a developer make even more money when it's gravel road? He probably, he doesn't reduce it by let's say hypothetically a 20% savings he's seeing, he's not gonna reduce a lot by 20%, he may only reduce it 5 or 10%. So yes, the developer, makes out on that, but.
I think ultimately the planning board should do what the DPW wants in this case. They're the ones that ultimately have to they have to deal with it after something is built. So if they have concerns with the gravel, they still want it to exist in some form, then I think that they should give us the specifications of what we want. I
Yeah,
think
and I'd
the
like to see
planning,
that
the
and
planning
discuss
board
that.
materials should reference whatever their specs are. So if they put it in their specifications and you just put a reference instead of, you know, rewording it all again and putting it in our regulations, if we refer everybody back to their regulations, then whatever the most current industry standards are will be brought forward, and that might help. I think another option is maybe the planning board should consider reducing the number of lots that can be on these gravel driveways. And there also probably needs to be something in the covenants that if something goes and people decide to pave that roadway or that driveway as it is, that it then has to be brought up to the appropriate stormwater and drainage and whatever other standards need to be put in place.
So
So
they
that way the owners know up front, because in most cases, Joe average homeowner does not know all of these things. You know, maybe everybody involved in this meeting right now understands the basics of it enough to try to save themselves, but the average homeowner out there, or the average person buying a thing, does not understand this. I mean,
Christine, you're correct on both points. You're correct on both points.
So, but that's not gonna change. There's always gonna be ignorance on, you know, we can put all the safeguards and the standards we want. If we're gonna allow a gravel drive, and we're gonna put notices on the plans that if you go to pave this, you gotta do it this time, and blah, blah, blah. They're
John, that's
still
what I'm
ignorant to
saying.
all
I'm
that.
saying
Excuse me, Steve,
right, that we
they're still
should-
ignorant to all that. Let me finish. They're still ignorant to all that.
Yep.
And they always will be. But how do we make your job easier, cleaner, for you? I'm all ears to try to make your job easier on how do we do that, and yet still provide flexibility for developers and homeowners to live on a gravel driveway if they choose to, with a certain limit. So I think the cleanest way might be anything with an easement has to have DPW involvement, whether it's gravel or pavement, and that meets town standards. So we eliminate somebody who's got a driveway to a single-family home, but we capture the common driveways that we always approve that has an easement.
And
Do you
we can
agree that
develop
that
a
would
gravel
cap-
standard for that.
Yeah, so I just say that ever since OSRDs have been incorporated into Dartmouth and been approved, we've had a lot of pushback from developers from our involvement, whether it's inspecting stormwater or the roadway installation. So with the planning board's help, if they install it, it has to be inspected by the DPW. Then that goes, it's on the plan, the notes are
It
there.
carries right through,
And it carries through with the development.
those guys
So
are
there's no
aware, of it.
question.
They can't hide from it.
Right, there's been a lot of question, there's a lot of gray area with them. Some of them we've inspected, some of them we haven't. And I know the planning board would also always like a letter from the DPW stating that everything's been built per plan. But sometimes we can't create that letter because we haven't done the inspections.
So
So if the planning board agrees when we discuss, I think that's an easy fix.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So are your rules written in a way that we could cross-reference with the code 360 so that our rules would say, in our determinations would say, our findings could say, driveway to be built according to DPW spec 16.52. In that way, if that spec ever changes,
We don't have to
John and
change
I,
anything.
we're not, I don't want to say we're hands off, but we're not in tune with what you're doing
Right.
all the time. If you made a change March 1st and somebody comes before us March 2nd, they have to go by your new rule.
Or you just say, has to be created with the DPW construction specifications, latest revision.
Right, the most recent.
And I think we can amend that easily to, I think 90% of it's in there already, because it's the same standard to bring it up for a paved road. It's just that we'll have it specific for a gravel road, and then we'll add, processed gravel probably for the top to stabilize it.
But I'm looking at the big picture. We're talking gravel roads right now, but I also want it to be across the board
So-
water connections, sewer tie-ins.
Everything.
So
Everything.
every plan that's
Amen, Kevin,
approved
you're
by the
totally right.
DPW has a note that references that all construction shall be according to the DPW construction specifications, latest revision. That's on every plan.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
we should be able to update our rules and bring it before town meeting, explaining what we're trying to do.
Oh, we
That's my-
won't need to bring this before town meeting. This is subdivision.
If it's.
This subdivision, we have to do it,
OSRD.
not, we have to have a meeting in-house. Correct, Chris?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear exactly
The
what you said.
subdivision rules and regulations,
Well, so
it's
part of
not a
it's in,
zoning, we can bring it in-house.
so this you typically bring before town meeting is what it's looked like to me in the past as well?
Zoning bylaws, we bring to
Zoning
town meeting.
bylaws.
Subdivision regulations.
You don't
we-
bring
don't.
before
We don't
at
have to
all?
bring before town meeting.
You don't have to,
No,
but
we
you
can,
have in the
we have
past?
No,
to have,
no.
no, we have to
Okay.
have a public hearing and vote in-house,
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So that would make it even simpler.
yes.
So then you probably should give us a draft of what you want, and then we can work with you to make that happen, and then what the note is that we need to see on the plan sets, because I can at least have that put on the plan sets now for the two that are before us.
That's a good idea.
All right, sounds
So,
good.
and that would trigger these other three comments, David, that if we were to do that, there'd be an application for a service, inspectional services, and then the driveways would have to be bonded, or the
Yeah,
easements.
So the
would have to be
inspectional
bonded.
services are simply anything we inspect outside of a DPW project, unless it's a water source, individual service to a house. If it's a project, then there's an inspectional service fee that's paid to the DPW by the developer for our time, being paid to inspect that project. And so at the beginning of every project, the developer sits down with the engineer and we work through the scope and how many hours we think it's gonna take to inspect the project. And they place that inspectional service funds with us, and then a project number is assigned, and at the end of the week or daily, as whatever engineer's on that project, he keeps track of how many hours he charges to that project.
But that's already in place for
That's in-
roadways.
that's in
It's just not in
place.
place for common
Yeah, that's in
driveways and
place.
easements.
That's in
So
place,
That's
and-
an easy verbiage
that's-
somewhere to make it work
Yeah,
for
yeah.
common driveway easements.
That's in place, and again, for anything we inspect, we charge.
Yep.
So a part of the reason why the bond items came up was because the planning board recently released some funds without a full review by DPW. I know that there was some discussions between town council and DPW on that, and council tried to articulate what you wanted going forward, but he said he did not represent you. The planning board made a decision to move forward with releasing the bond, and I know that Dave had expressed some concerns with that. So we've got to have a more cohesive, I guess, communication as far as that goes. I think part of the problem is the planning board works under a lot of timelines. I know that DPW, is stretched thin, and, I know things are difficult there, but planning board is working under various sets of timelines, so we need to have,
So-
some type of a,
So let me just tell you historically, and John knows this, any subdivision had a bond, and the bond was in place for the full cost of the subdivision if they wanted to release lots early on. This was years ago. In the planning board, we worked with the planning board on that bond, and when there were development of a paper street, the building department had the bond. And so now with the OSRD, our position is that, again, anytime anyone's doing any utility work, we need a bond on it to assure that the work's being done properly. And even more importantly, again, that there are good contractors and bad contractors. We need to have some type of recourse if the utility isn't put in properly, or if the materials weren't approved by us. If we get a call and say, hey, we put the water main in the other day. Well, we need to protect lot owners and protect the town to make sure the materials are put in and inspect it. So, as we have historically done for the planning for subdivisions, paper streets through the building department, we should be doing that same bond for any type of work that we're inspecting, when it comes to releasing lots. And of course, what evolved over the years relative to releasing lots was this, it's in your subdivision regulations, was the whole issue about not releasing lots until the drainage is functional. And that was put in because years ago we had problems with developments being built, and they're building homes and runoffs being developed, but the detention ponds hadn't been built, and either neighbors were being impacted or the public was being impacted where it was sheet flowing out into the public way.
So how many issues have we had where we released a bond without a DPW sign off? Has that been a common occurrence?
Well, something new that has come up is this Triparty. We had never heard of it, but apparently it's in the regulations, apparently it's in the subdivision control law, where the DPW is almost acting as the bank's agent, releasing money for the developer. And historically, you know, a developer would post a bond, and then at a certain point, maybe halfway through the project, he'd ask for a bond reduction. We'd give him credit for everything was done and saying, here's what needs to be held to complete the work. What we found recently on at least one project, which was a surprise to us, is that every month we were getting a bond reduction request. We were essentially releasing the money. They were taking our letter to the bank to get the money released as part of this Triparty Agreement that the town was a part of.
We should put a stop to
So
that.
was too much money getting released?
No, it's just that for us to go out every month and inspect and do a detailed breakdown and a cost estimate of what's been done, it's very time consuming.
It costs prohibitive, maybe.
So we do have two for the project that you're referring to that have come in now. So one has been since February, and now there's another one in since the beginning of the month. So should we put limits in the future?
Well,
Like-
I think that, again, we had never seen these before until a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, when we heard of the first one.
And we've never issued a bond for a full, complete subdivision prior to one shovel being put into the ground
Right.
to release lots.
And then a month later, we're getting a bond reduction request. And then the next month, another bond reduction request.
And you have
It's
to
just
go
a
out
lot
and
of work
inspect
for the
every
town.
time.
So we should limit the number of times that they can do it. Like they should be able to do it halfway through and then the end or something like that.
Well, normally, we don't see a surety request until the drainage is complete and functioning, which means that the drainage is installed, the binder course is down, and the storm grades are at binder grade, so the drainage, the runoff can go into the catch basins and be discharged properly, and the ponds have erosion control, and are accepting the stormwater. Then.
No bond release until those things are done.
What's that?
No bond release until those 3 things you just mentioned are completed.
Right, and that's under section 3.214J, prior to release of lots for building or sale, drainage facilities shall be functioning and operating.
So what you're saying under this tri-party situation is they're getting these bonds released slowly before the work's all done.
They actually submitted a bond prior to any of the work being done, so they could release the lots for sale or building.
That's not right. We gotta stop that. That's not right.
And then every step of the way, the trees got cut, so they submit a bond release. They, they subgraded, stripped the soil.
Another bond
We want
release.
another bond release. And
We're gonna
that's,
get a lot of pushback though from
It's, again,
developers.
I
You know,
think,
we've got, so from a developer, I'm trying to understand this correctly. So when a developer comes in, you guys review the bonding requirements, you set all the things, the limits, you set the inspectional services and the fees based on how many times you go out there. So I'm John Q, developer, and I've got stuff in the ground, that's an investment for me, I need to get money back in my wallet to move on to other projects as I continue this project. I've paid you guys to do my inspections, and now there's an issue with, well, we don't wanna keep doing these inspections, so how do we, what do we
Yeah,
tell the developer in that
well,
case?
so-
Hey, I've
so-
already paid for this inspection.
So here's
what
the
do you mean?
problem, here's the problem. You know, I think you've noticed in the past several years, aside from private developers, the town's done a tremendous amount of work. And so we have our own projects that we're paying unit costs for. You know, when we build a piping, you know, water main upgrade or a road, sidewalks, curbing, everything is unit cost. We have to have an inspector there most of the time that contract is working. So we only have four engineers. We have 5 ones out. Tim is stuck in the office most of the time. So I got 3 guys running around trying to do, you know, keep an eye on everything that's going on in town. And again, it's not uncommon for the DPW to be running 2 or 3 projects at one time, large projects that we need people on. So it's really, it's a time constraint type of thing.
Right, so it's a staffing issue, but,
Yeah.
you know, your problem is all now become the developer's problem, and the developer's sitting there, hey, wait a minute. And, you know, the town needs to figure out how they're gonna staff these
Well,
projects.
it's an
I've already
engineer's
paid my
problem
fee.
too.
I'm being.
It's an
I'm-
engineer's problem too, because the engineers are complaining because they're sending in plans expecting that we're, you know, like the fire department, waiting for the fire alarm to go off. We're not waiting for plans to come in, but they want it turned around quickly.
But you're saying this is
No.
only with the tri-party?
Yeah,
It's not with just a conventional
normally not.
security, it's
No,
only
the
with the
tri-party
tri-party?
seems to be something new to us that we see that if
Update,
this is
why did we do the
the new way
tri-party?
of doing it, it's gonna be
Remember,
a real
it was-
burden for the
It was
department.
Clarendon, what was that whole tri-party? You were heavily involved in that. What
It
what
was,
was the rationale? What was our
it was a
thinking when
bank
we
term, and to try to prevent something like Clarendon Street again. I'm thinking, of, as we're talking, why couldn't we do a disbursement schedule like if you have built a house, a construction loan, as a banker, you only are allowed 6 inspections, period. You're paying per inspection, and you're gonna get 10%, 20% at first, or whatever percentages you want. With the construction loan, we don't just start dispersing funds. We give you 10% up front. When the foundation is in, the house is framed and boarded, we're gonna give you the next 20%. When the roof, the windows, the siding is done, we give the next 20%. We do that, and then at the end, we're holding the 10% back. So it was an issue, and why we used them was to prevent us from having to release the lots, but also allowing the developers to have some credit and not have to be, it's used more with the bank letters so that they can reduce the amount that they're paying the bank for their letter of credit, because a letter of credit costs the developer. So every time they reduce it, they're getting charged less by the bank. So by having the tri-party agreement, we're able to minimize the expenses, but still protect the town. So if we could, and I use the term loosely, I say we, that really, now that you know a little bit more about them, we don't use them often, but if you could come up with some type of schedule, so when you first meet with the person, even if you have to charge extra, say, fine, it's a tri-party agreement. Normally your inspection fee is $500. With this, you're gonna be doing more. We're gonna allow this amount of schedule. We want these key factors done, but your inspections, instead of 500 each, are 750 each.
But if the staffing level is the problem, that's still gonna be an issue, so.
Not
That information
right,
needs to
but
come from the DPW.
from
on
them, and
How
that's-
do you wanna do that?
I
Do
think
you
all
wanna
you could
increase
ask-
your fee or limit the amount of times you go out there and say, hey, Mr. Developer, you got 6 chances. You got, you know.
Exactly, and that's where you're gonna
3
save
strikes
on
and you're out, you're done. So we need to hear that from you, because again, you're gonna get pushback, we're gonna get pushback from the
Yep.
developers saying, hey, I've got, you know, bonded, I've got this, I paid my inspection fees, and I can't get an inspection, or I can't get money released, so.
But I think-
But if they
think-
know up front, you know, that there's a limit,
Yep.
You know, if you could give us some guidelines on what you think that limit
Well,
should
I
be, and
think
how
the-
that would help you.
I think the first question, because we'd never heard of this Triparty Agreement until a few months ago, is are there any restrictions in the Mass General, or in the subdivision control law that limits or doesn't limit how many reductions, you know, or a bond, or surety reduction request they can ask for? There may be something that precludes us from doing that. If not, we can certainly come back and
Not that I'm
give you
aware
a
of.
schedule and say, we think there should be, you know, a reduction at this point, this point, this point, this, you know, when a utility is fully installed, fully tested, and we know that this water system is ready to go, yeah, okay, we'll reduce the water. You know, we've tested it, we know it's good, we know there are no leaks. Yeah, we'll release that. Same thing with the sewer. Once all the testing's done, we'll release the sewer.
We got a release request when structures and water materials were on site and sitting on the site but not installed yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's not the way, that's not the
Oh,
intent.
well, we would do it.
That one was one of the industrial parks, I think, right?
It
No,
should
that
be,
wasn't.
No, there was
Because we also
another,
had a
they
problem, we also had a
delivered the
problem with
pipe.
one
and-
of those.
No, that was, I think I know which
Recently.
was subdivision.
so I
yeah.
wanna
But I
understand, how
thought-
did it work prior to the Triparty Agreement? So we were bonded and there were sureties.
Yep.
That developers would come in and say, hey, I wanna release 20% or, you know, this dollar amount based on, I've got all my water in.
Yeah,
Did you have those
normally
issues
they
back
come
then?
in, they
Because I
ask for a
imagine the
bond
developers that
reduction,
wouldn't
and
come-
we determine what's done and
come
accepted.
till the end, and for, some developers would come 6, 7, 8 times, so, how did you handle it back then? Because that must have been.
Yeah, I don't think it
happening.
was that often, John.
It wasn't that often.
back
So
then, no.
you think it's
And
just
I-
this
And I'm almost
Triparty
wondering
is-
whether there was
there's
a
more,
limit on how many reductions you could ask
There's more
for.
incentive for them to go,
Yeah,
or more need.
yeah. The point is, it just appeared with this Tri-Party Agreement that this was gonna be a monthly disbursement. You know, the monthly report to the bank on what's been done and accepted by the town, and here's how much that was valued.
Yeah, they're raising it
Release
like
the
a
money,
construction of a
so-
home.
So I could take the
Yeah.
money and now pay the pay the contractor.
Right.
I think that's really what was going on.
So I would suggest that you come up with
You come
something
up with a schedule.
that you think is a reasonable schedule for developers to adhere to, that's, again, is reasonable.
So I know that the other one that we had an issue with was the release that had to do with the executive center. And that had to do with the drainage, and then I thought that was some of the things on site that weren't installed. So that one wasn't a tri-party agreement, but that was another issue.
No, that was an issue because the gravel that was installed, they installed it and then we found out that it didn't meet the civ requirements
It didn't meet the
and
requirements.
it's still in place.
Now, in
And
that
they
case,
asked for a release.
if they have to meet your construction standards, you have the right to say, hey, Mr. Developer, that's gonna be ripped up and you're gonna meet the civ requirements.
Right.
Compaction, whatever else.
So we issued a reduction that was a bit higher than the engineer's reduction request on that project due to that issue.
Yep. And you've never seen an issue with the planning board, to my knowledge, or have you, with the planning board is saying, oh, we don't agree with that, that statement? We've always, if you guys are saying, you know, there's gotta be, material pulled out or something,
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty good
So-
about not releasing money unless it's
Right.
acceptable.
Okay, so I think that's something we could certainly
Yeah,
work
I think
together
that's
on
something we can
going
work
forward.
with. Yep. So we have two issues up, we have the gravel road issue and we have the bonding, so we got two, we're putting you to work.
Okay.
I would say, if those requests come in, and I have to forward them to you, if you don't have time to do it right now, or you don't have, you know, the inspectors available, or you don't, you know, if it doesn't meet your approval, just give me an email right back saying no, and then that way there I can say, you know, it's not done yet, do you want a continuance, yes or no? You know, I can get the planning, my problem is when I go to the planning board and say, well, DPW hasn't given us a response yet, so just say no. That's all I need from you, and then
Right.
they'll have to do what you say. I mean,
Absolutely, just say no and then don't put it on the agenda till they've got it done.
So I had a question on that. I realized the initial review, the town needs to respond within a certain amount of time. But on subsequent reviews, and the problem we're having that I think have created some problems for you, us, the developer, the engineer, is when we review a plan and we ask for things to be done, and then we submitted our comments to you, you share them with the developer, and 2 weeks later, we get a set of plans that come in, and we go through our list and they haven't addressed our concerns.
Right.
And it may not happen one time, it may happen 2 or 3 times. And now everyone's pointing at the DPW saying, well, you know, they're delaying us. Well, it's because they're not responding to our comments properly.
Well, I
We
know
need to know
one of
that.
So, and so I
One of the
sense that at
items-
some point, the
Right.
planning board needs to get this plan approved. And so that's the question I have,
Well,
because
we
it
don't
really,
have to get it approved, Dave. We can wait until you want it approved. We do not have to approve it till you say you're done, and that's what.
But I have to get timeline extensions signed and things like that. So all I have to do is know it. So in the case of one of the projects that's on your desk now, I didn't know until last week when I pushed the engineer, that he had submitted another set of plans to you. So I'm thinking that, okay, we're still waiting for comments, we're still waiting for him to respond to your last comments. Well, lo and behold, he decided to go around the planning board or the planning
See-
office and send them directly to you
and I'm
guys.
glad you brought that up, because that should not happen.
Right, so that was a problem.
Everything has to go through one agency, it should go through the planning board and then be dispersed. So we're all looking at the same
Right.
plan.
I will ultimately do whatever you want,
Yeah.
but they can't be submitting to you directly anymore.
And I explained that.
We
to
can't
He
do that.
rectified the situation,
Yeah.
and, you know, I think, right, but, you know, you can just say you need time or whatever, and as long as I can get the timeline extensions going, and I know enough not to put it on the agenda like Steve is concerned about,
Okay.
you know, I could do that, but if I don't have anything that tells me, you know, we're not gonna be ready a week before, I post the agenda the Wednesday before the meeting, and then that's in order to meet the timelines that I have to do, and then I prepare the packages and they go out on Fridays.
So what I would ask is that, again, one, everything run through the planning board and then be sent out to DPW, so you're controlling the plan that we're getting, number one, but also the dates. So if you could, in your memo to us, give us a cutoff date. Say,
Okay.
we need this, so when the memo comes in, we say, we need this by June 3rd, and we look at our schedule and say, it's not gonna happen.
You just tell us.
Then we can tell you right away, it's not gonna happen by June 3rd, we need.
Okay, yeah.
And I
Right.
think that way, it'll be easier to communicate as long as it's all documented. We maybe send it back in the
Yeah,
form of an
excellent.
email.
That's a good plan.
Yeah,
David, may I ask a question? Dave,
yeah,
Go ahead.
may I ask a question? Because first of all, let me say that the DPW has done marvelous work as far as I'm concerned, firsthand knowledge, okay, of the things that you gentlemen do. But I have a question. When somebody brings a set of plans to the town for the DPW to review, what do other towns do? Do some towns hire like consultants to
smaller
review
towns
the
do.
plan? And how
Yeah,
does that, would that give you more time, David, to do the inspections and to do the town work?
no, I don't think so. We're set up a little different than most towns. I mean, big towns
Okay.
have engineering departments. I think the ones that
Right.
you see that send out are towns that don't have, Fairhaven's a good example. They're a smaller group. Tibbetts historically, I think, did all their review. They have another firm now that does it. Yeah, I think that's mostly smaller towns that send it out. Larger towns with engineering departments do it in-house.
Oh, so that wouldn't help you if we would send those plans out to them? Okay,
No.
just trying to,
Yeah,
just trying to
no.
think of a way that might help the DPW, because I know you're shorthanded,
Yeah.
and I know you've got a lot of work.
No, you know, it's funny, Public Works is a funny group in that so much of it is institutional knowledge, and to find a consultant to do that would have to be a consultant that you got for
For the
the long
town.
term. Otherwise, he's gonna be just calling Tim or one of the engineers, asking, well, what's here, or, you know, how could I do, because they don't know the history. That's a big part of the review. You know, knowing areas that tend to flood, or knowing if we have problems with water quality or water
You know your
pressure.
soil quality and.
Yeah,
and-
so that's a big part of the review.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I just want to back up for just clarification on one thing. So, you know, as you stated, you know, we have timelines that we're obligated to meet. when somebody submits a subdivision plan or whatever it may be, the state guidelines that we have to act within so many days upon a review from the town. And it's not just the planning board, it's you folks, conservation, blah, blah, blah. But we have to make a decision within X amount of days. It doesn't have to be a favorable decision. We have to make a decision in X amount of days. Now, if we're going through the review process, and we've already put the developer on notice, hey, we've got comments from the DPW, they've got all these outstanding issues, we can't approve this plan until all those issues are resolved. So they submit revision 2 to Christine, she forwards it to you. If you folks can't meet the deadline of our next hearing, or maybe the deadlines of whenever the 120 days, 180, whatever it is, you let us know. We'd have to tell the developer to do a time extension on it. But we still have to be reasonable to developers and say, we can't unreasonably extend a project because DPW is understaffed, it doesn't have to have time. And to your point about someone bypassing this system, we're never gonna stop that.
Yeah.
If some idiot engineer wants to bypass Christine and bring it directly to your office, we can't stop that. We can slap their hand when we're notified of it, noticed of it, and say, don't do that again, blah, blah. But we can't prevent that. But certainly, if we could get notice, because we've had many occasions where we're sitting there, here comes a public hearing, we open up, people, abutters aren't coming, to this public, because they went to the last one 3 weeks ago. Now there's a new one, and we don't have comments from the DPU. What's really frustrating is no comment. We don't know if they're approved it or not approved it. Now we got to extend it, but that's not fair to the developer, not only the developer, but the abutters that have an interest, that come to these meetings and want to know what the outcome is and comment on drainage issues and everything else that's associated with it. So the more communications between us is better for everybody.
I think we can
involved.
work
It's
that
not just
out
benefit the
by
developer.
having set dates that we can work
Yes,
toward.
I think that the
that's- I find
memo suggested
Everything we
that
do,
we-
you need to set a goal date and work toward that. I think the concern, John, is that when, we're up against the end of your time limitation, and we get the plan back, and
still
2
don't
of the
meet it.
5 things we asked for, they haven't addressed.
Yeah.
And
There
it's
is
crystal
no.
clear, this is what we're asking for, but you haven't done it.
Yeah.
How many times do you need to resubmit to get that on the plan?
Just-
Well,
need to-
unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about
We just say
those
no.
kind of idiots.
Yeah.
And they exist in the world, and we're just gonna, all we can do is, when they're before us, and we have a letter from you, hey, DPW had 5 issues, you only met 2 of them, 3 of them are still outstanding. This is
I
not
can
gonna get
also-
approved in the 120 days, or it may not get approved in your time extension. This needs to be done per the DPW. And if they wanna sit on their hands, at least it's not us, it's them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, yes, you gotta look at it again, but, the world is full of idiots,
I think the other thing that I can do, which I haven't done since I've been here, is really implement timelines, put deadlines in place for people when they're submitting. I've been leaning in that and taking some of that in, so I think I will put those deadlines. A hard and fast, you have to have it in by this date in order to be on the next agenda. And that way,
That's
that
the
will
key
stop
date.
a lot of this. I
That's a
think
good
that,
start.
again, I've been trying to work with the developers and, trying to keep things moving right now, but it's
That's
just
the way
too,
we've
if it's too much for
operated in the
you.
past.
If it's too much for both things, then,
We've always
we can
operated in
slow
the
it.
past with a deadline. Yes, you couldn't get on the agenda unless it was in by X,
Right,
Y.
but
Right.
we had certain engineers who were buddies, and it just, believe me.
Engineers who are
You-
buddies.
you
with
know,
developers, it's
right?
not something we should worry about.
Okay, drainage installations, utility installations,
We're all set with that. That
well,
was,
that's all the
yeah,
part of the.
part of
other
the
ones.
road.
Sidewalk requirements.
So before we talk about sidewalks, I just wanted to share some news. Literally, this report was presented to me by our intern this morning, our UMass Dartmouth intern. He's done a lot of great work for us. One of the tasks I had asked him to look into was to do a study on the tree versus sidewalk issue we're having in town. It's every couple of weeks, maybe once a month, I get a call from a neighbor or an email with pictures saying, can you come and fix the sidewalk in front of my house? It's a tripping hazard. And so, you know, I'll go out, most of the time I know the subdivision. But to make a long story short, our intern looked at 41 streets, and he did a full assessment of how many trees, how many were impacted by, how many sidewalks were impacted by trees. And unfortunately, 68% of those trees on 41 streets in town had damaged sidewalks, equating to 501 trees that have damaged sidewalks. And so part of his work, we asked him to look at the 3 options that we talked about to start to address this massive problem in town, typically in subdivisions that were built in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. You know, the older the subdivision, the bigger the tree and the more damage to the sidewalk that was built right beside it. And so he's looked at that, and the 3 options are, you know, option 1 is take, you know, if this is the tree and this is the sidewalk and this is your lot, option 1 is take an easement and move the sidewalk around the tree. Cost prohibitive, you know, to take easements on individual lots, to survey, town meeting, appraisal, you can't do it. Option 2 is, you know, cut down the tree and repair the sidewalk. 501 trees? I don't think so.
Another huge expense. Yep.
It's a huge expense, but, and then the third option is to remove the sidewalk. And one of the concerns we're having now, when we touch a sidewalk, or a road for that matter, is per ADA requirements, we need to bring that sidewalk up to full compliance now.
Yeah.
You know, back in the 80s, they put in a sidewalk, you know, in the 90s, in the early 2000s. Nowadays, you put a sidewalk in, it's got to be fully compliant. And it's not an easy thing to do, particularly with asphalt. It's easier actually with concrete, because you can create your forms and make it all work before you pour the concrete. So I just want to share that with you before we talk about what we need to do on new construction, so that, you know, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, whoever's sitting here is not going to be talking about the trees ruining the sidewalks like we are. This report, again, I just got it this morning and went through the highlights. You know, I plan to share it with the Board of Public Works, probably the Selectmen as well.
Yeah, could you share it with us?
Yeah, and I will. I'll get it out to everyone. And you know, and that's what I've been telling residents who call me now to tell me about the damaged sidewalk in front of their house. I said, we're working on a report. We're trying to figure out. It's a huge problem, town-wide, and we're trying to figure out what's the best option. And so that's, again, the best option may be to just remove the sidewalks in these subdivisions.
That's for the problem, but going forward, do you see an issue with the way the regulation, because the regulation is different than what they were?
Yeah, so
Years
I
ago.
think the concerns we have, and when the engineers look at it, is the, you know, the right-of-way width. It's very difficult to get a sidewalk and a tree in a road in a 40-foot right-of-way. You know, if it's an old paper street, we have to live with that. But if we want street trees and a sidewalk, at a minimum, you have to have a 50-foot right-of-way. And then the question becomes, you know, when we go to a 50-foot right-of-way, we shouldn't automatically be putting in a larger pavement, you know, which our regulations now call for. You know, they have a 40-foot right-of-way, I think it's 22 feet. When you go out to a 50-foot right-of-way, I believe it's 26 or 28, 26. That's something we should probably think about. And again, our goal is, as John mentioned earlier, less pavement's good, slows traffic down. But it also gives us in a 50-foot right-of-way more space to get street trees as further away from the edge of pavement for safety, and also further away from the sidewalks, so they're not damaging sidewalks over time.
Is there a species where the root goes just down rather than, can we work on one of those things too? I mean, attack it from all different angles.
Well, a lot of times, if you have the right, well, if the topography allows, you know, you can have trees up, you know, at a different elevation than the street. And some subdivisions, you see that works nice, but it's not a guaranteed solution. I think it's something we need to work on. I have a couple, our engineers, we've been looking at it as part of our construction specification upgrade, you know, on what would work, and 40-foot right away on new development is just not big enough, you know, for street trees and sidewalks.
Why don't we just change it to a 50-foot right-of-way? I mean, what's wrong with that idea?
That's what we would recommend,
Me too.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's something we could look at.
Yeah.
Dave, I don't know, I remember, the problem in your report is there's nothing we can do about that, and that's existed.
Yeah,
You know, I grew up in the 50s and 60s on Stevens Street in Bliss Corner, and there was always trees and sidewalks, and they were always, you know, ruining the sidewalks. That problems exist, you know, back then. I can remember a time, it was before, you know, when I got on the plane, there was already regulations requiring sidewalks and street trees, and at that time, there was pavement, curbing, a grass strip with trees in it, and then sidewalks. Whether it was 40 feet, 50 feet, 60-foot right-of-ways, that were the road standards. And at some point, I don't remember when, but the DPW said, hey, we're having problems with trees. Can we move the trees to the outside, closer to the easement? And we did that. So you're saying that the problem is still existing in those circumstances? That
yeah,
40 feet is not-
I think, John,
not-
this is in the report, there are three good examples, and the example of a good sidewalk actually has the edge of pavement, a grass strip, a sidewalk, and then the tree is between the sidewalk and the front
Right-of-way,
lot,
yeah.
you know, on the edge of the right-of-way. So there's a great picture here of
Yeah,
that.
so that problem, there was a fix. I can't remember how many years ago, so you're saying that fix
Yeah.
didn't work?
Yeah,
That's
well,
still giving you a problem.
that will work, but it would never work in a 40-foot right-of-way,
Right, but
you know.
in that instance, it's probably a 40-foot right-of-way.
Uh,
But we didn't address that. When we made that change, I don't think there was even any discussion to eliminate the 40-foot right-of-way.
Yeah, I don't know.
So now we're seeing this issue, which, you know, quite honest with you, is we could still have varying, based on the number of lots, varying pavement widths, but every right-of-way has to be 50 feet. We don't allow 40-foot right-of-ways.
Yeah, it
'Cause
just gives,
I
it
personally-
gives everyone more flexibility to design a nicer road.
Yeah. I'm a huge proponent of sidewalks, and I'm a huge proponent of street trees. I think the benefits far outweigh any future costs going down the road. Now, is there a better way we could do business? Yes.
Yeah.
You know, 40-foot, 50-foot right-of-ways to eliminate the problems you have. So I think that's something the planning board could easily look at and make a change in the regulations and say, you know, the hierarchy of pavement widths still will be there depending on the number of lots, but easements all have to be 50-foot easement now to allow for sidewalks and street trees. There are a lot of subdivisions we're not putting in sidewalks anymore, but we're putting in street trees. But we still should have the ability to put in sidewalks at some point if the
Yeah,
people
even if
wanna
it's in
do
the
that.
future, you know.
And why not plan for it? So we could put in the 50-foot right-of-way, the trees are close to the edge of the easement, and if there's any point in the future where a sidewalk is added, there's adequate room.
So I know that we had discussed a couple of times that maybe there's some places where sidewalks should not be going, and we should be doing some like fee in lieu of or something like that. Some of these dead-end OSRD subdivisions maybe don't need sidewalks. So is that something you still want us to look at?
Yes.
Is that a better option? Because you definitely have your list of priorities where you do want sidewalks, right?
So, we have a complete street plan, and one of the components of the plan was sidewalks, where they make sense. And so we prioritize that, and I'm of the belief, you know, there's nothing more rewarding for the DPW than to build a sidewalk and see people walking on it. And it seems like most of the sidewalks we've done in the past, you know, 8 or 10 years are used, you know. Elm Street's probably the classic, there's constantly people walking there. But just seeing how you have Slocum Road, now you have Potter Street, you have Milton Street with new sidewalks, Sharp Street. You know, we've created a nice, a walking area that you can get from place to place in town. So our priority is to put sidewalks where, for safety reasons, and sidewalks that people are gonna use. You know, for instance, I think one of our highest priority now is Russell Mills Road. You know, if you look at that area between the police station up to Jason Drive, I guess, that'd be a great spot for a sidewalk, and I
Yeah,
bet it would be.
they use the Bakerville Road one all the time, too.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be heavily used. So anyhow, the point is we do have a plan for sidewalks, and we've been tackling it since 2017, which is when we established the plan. We have tackled Peyton Aram, Milton Street, Dartmouth Street from Howland Street down to Middle, and then Prospect from Middle to Elm is in design now. That's on the tip for 2020.
Could you also get us a copy of that?
Of
Send
the-
us a copy of your
Yeah, I
plan?
can do that.
Yeah, so we can.
So what happens with the ones, like, we have a couple of subdivisions, we have one now where they wanted a waiver on sidewalks. Do you want the planning board to grant those waivers and do something?
What I would suggest, if you can do that, would be gift accounts. You know, we have a gift account with utilities when they do utility work that damages the road, and the road needs to now have work done to it. They will provide money to the town to fund the reconstruction of that road. You know, Eversource Gas is probably the classic example. So, you know, I think you should explore a gift account and see if the town can create a sidewalk fund
So we should.
for these priority locations.
Right,
you know.
as opposed to just putting them on every subdivision. That's what you would prefer, or not necessarily, am I misunderstanding?
I just think that if the funds are limited, then you want to put the money where people are going to use the sidewalks, you know, in safety as well. You know, I lived in a relatively new subdivision for several years in town, and we didn't have any sidewalks, and the neighborhood that the subdivision was built in didn't have sidewalks, so it was probably a good decision not to put a sidewalk in there, but never once did I hear anyone who lived on that, probably 15 or 16 lots in there, no one ever complained that they didn't have a sidewalk because it was all local traffic. It was a typical subdivision with a, cul-de-sac at the end. All the residents drove up and down the street, there were a lot of young kids, and so.
So the issue with that, Dave, that concept, in my opinion, is that, there's a requirement for sidewalks now, and a planning board and town meeting said that, a development this size shall have a sidewalk. For good reason. It benefits the direct abutters, it benefits people visiting the neighborhood, walking through the neighborhood, and it's built by the developer, not by the town. There's no cost incurred by the town. So that concept of creating this fund is where we take that money, put where sidewalks may be a higher priority area. We're just kicking the can down the road. So now that 16-lot subdivision that we said, oh, we'll take the money and we'll put the sidewalk on Russell Mills Road instead of that 16-lot subdivision. 50 years down the road, they want a sidewalk, it's a public road, and the town's got to pay for a sidewalk there now. They're left without a sidewalk. So I don't think new developers should be paying for past mistakes 3 miles away that the town didn't put a sidewalk for whatever reason back then. So if sidewalks are a requirement, they should be built, in my opinion, at that spot. I'm a huge proponent of sidewalks, but I also know, Elm Street, I think was wonderful, but I also remember reading all the problems we had with people not wanting a sidewalk on Elm Street. Where when we put sidewalk in through a development, that issue doesn't exist.
Because the people haven't moved in yet, but, again, I think sidewalks in areas that are gonna be, number one, serve a safety function, and number two, an area where people are gonna use them. when I say people, you know, the general public is gonna use a sidewalk that's built on a primary road, like Russell's Mills Road, like Cross Road, like Dartmouth Street, versus a subdivision that may be down off of William Street, where William Street doesn't have sidewalks, and, you know.
But where does
again,
that, where does that concept stop, is my point, is that, so we're robbing a 16 lot, you know, subdivision of a sidewalk, we'll put it where it may get higher use. Let's say, the example, Russell's Mills Road, I think is a great place for sidewalk, is it so?
John,
Yes.
may I weigh in
I think
on
the
that?
town, let me finish, the town should put one there. But what's to say that, hey, are we better off? You know, that's gonna get a lot of use if we built one on Russell's Mills Road. But what if we build a bike path or a walking path through XYZ piece of property that's gonna get 3 times as much use as Russell's Mills? Where do we stop? We keep, you know, we're better off using it there, we're better off using there, we're better off using it. We could
I
run
think,
that
you know, as
philosophy all day
planners,
long.
maybe you would want to do a survey and monitor a subdivision with sidewalks and see how many people actually use them. You know, Tim and I were talking about it the other day, and I said, you know, Songbird I thought was a really good example of a sidewalk on that main Songbird Drive that went in. But all the little, you know, 2 lot here, 3 lot here, 4 lot here, the little wings that came off of Songbird, probably didn't make sense to have sidewalks in there, but I think that was a good subdivision because it was so long and people could walk within the subdivision. But when you get out to Reed Road, there weren't any sidewalks, and I don't foresee them being out there for some time.
What is our tipping point to put in sidewalks? How many houses? I don't remember what it is.
I don't remember how many, to be honest with
Yeah, I
you.
don't know, again, there's a
John
hierarchy.
and Lori and Dave, can I make a comment here?
Go ahead.
I think Dave and John are both absolutely right in their comments, and the important reason is because every time we do a subdivision, whether it's an OSRD or an ANR, doesn't matter, we're losing 30-something cents on the dollar.
Steve, we're here to talk to TPW. We all know your attitude about that, so please stick to the subject.
We talked about 5 cents or about sidewalks and these other things. What we need to do is build sidewalks on the roads that get the traffic before we allow any more subdivision. Then we can worry about whether to put sidewalks in the subdivisions. But
Right,
Dave is
so-
absolutely right that we should have sidewalks in the places where people are gonna walk, but there's no need to build 16 more units of a subdivision until we're fixed up where we already have houses.
So, but Steve, what he's saying is that we should look at creating a gift account where we put in a subdivision, that sidewalk now be put on Russell's Mills Road.
Or we
The
don't
problem
put in a
is, the town
subdivision,
should be
we
paying
haven't
for
put in
sidewalks
one.
where we need them, not, you know, a developer who's trying to develop a lot for 16 lots. I don't think that's fair to a developer. If it
Well, I
requires
think-
sidewalks should go there.
I think you
They
could-
shouldn't be required to build a
think
sidewalk.
part
I think you could
part
give
of
the
the-
developer the
Road.
option and say, you know, the subdivision regulations require sidewalks. One option would be, if you don't want to put them in your subdivision, that maybe is going to be private, I don't know, instead of that, in lieu of that, you could gift that to the sidewalk gift account. And that's going to be used for the town's priority plan, our complete street priority plan, which we are committed to doing.
Yeah, but the town's got, you know, we have to set standards. So are you gonna do the same thing for a developer that comes in and say, hey, our requirement is a 12-inch sewer line, but if you don't wanna put that in, you only have to put a 3-inch.
No, I think certain things are
Help us put a
optional.
10-inch over there.
Probably the
So
only thing is a sidewalk, you know.
A standard is a standard, and, you know, it
But
should be
so
adhered
now
to.
we do have somebody who's going to come forward. One of the subdivisions that's currently under construction, they're coming forward with a waiver request, right?
How many
So-
lots?
I'm sorry, what?
How many lots?
That's a 21 lot. But,
Oh.
so now, that one there, from what I understand, the sidewalks can't, it would be very difficult to build them to ADA standards, so that's part of the problem here. And then the sidewalks maybe don't necessarily connect to existing sidewalks, so it's not part of an existing pattern. So I think it's finding a balance between connecting, you know, rather than just having sidewalks to nowhere, or, you know, finding some go-between, or to make sure that we can be ADA compliant, because some of these designs of these places now that we're trying to fit in, they can't become really ADA
But
compliant.
Christine, what if the 21 lots became 12 lots? Then they'd probably have plenty of room for everything. I mean, we just have to stop assuming that we gotta put in every 21 lot subdivision that comes down the path. We don't need to assume we have to do that. That may be a mistake.
Well, until those regulations change, Steve, we have to address those problems.
You're
That-
right, John.
that-
And what I'm saying
That
is-
philosophy has not been adopted by the town of Dartmouth yet. Until that does, we have to address these important issues and problems in town.
Right,
So
but it's our job
that's-
to create the plans that change those regulations, so we're saying the same thing from a different point of view.
No,
No, you are.
You
We
are.
are not. You
We're
are.
not.
You've got a different solution to the problem, is.
That may
and-
be true, but we can at least talk about it.
I also think when you're looking at sidewalks, that continuity is definitely key. When you're connecting, whether it's schools or plazas or other roadways that have sidewalks, and you're looking at subdivisions off of those roads, that they work. You're gonna walk from a sidewalk to a sidewalk, but when you're in a rural subdivision with no roads have sidewalks, it's tough to install a sidewalk from nowhere to nowhere.
So I live in one of these 1980s, 88, and we have probably 30-inch, 36-inch blacktop sidewalks, and they're more of a hazard than a benefit in my neighborhood. Most of the street trees have fallen over, torn them up. Right in front of my own house, I have the power is right on my property, and I know when that tree comes down, we're gonna lose power because those roots are probably wrapped around the power cords underneath the sidewalk. And by living here and seeing it and watching people walking the street, it's a cul-de-sac, there's probably 12 houses, 13 houses, and I like the idea. I mean, I like the idea of prioritizing and letting the towns decide where the best use for the sidewalk fund is. Now, do we want to reduce the rate a little bit and say, okay, it's going to cost you $100 a linear foot to put the sidewalk in? We'll let you contribute $75 a linear foot to the town. The town can take that money and do Russell's Mills Road. I'm looking at it, John, as Social Security. People that are collecting Social Security today are not working, paying in. I'm paying in to Social Security for those people. These new developments can pay into to the fund for sidewalks where it's best suited. So maybe down the road, if that side development wants a sidewalk, they can get on the list, they can be prioritized by the number of people that would be serviced. Like Windsong, the main road, great, the side streets don't need it so much. Just a different way of looking at it.
Well, it's just, I can't disagree with you more. I think the sidewalk, if we have a standard, a hierarchy, and again, there are limits, X amount of houses requires the sidewalks. We learn from past mistakes, our standards, our construction standards evolve as trees impact, the materials change, so we try to put the best sidewalk as engineering practices allow for the time period we're doing it with. So what happened 30 years ago is not happening today. But this is the planning board, and we should be planning for the future. So the sidewalks to nowhere, I think, sometimes don't make sense. But when that gets extended, or when the rural road that now is all of a sudden it's got A&Rs all the way down, and that needs sidewalks on it too, that we've got sidewalks that are now connected. I've seen time again, in my tenure, is that I've been part of that problem where we've had a sidewalk here, a sidewalk there, and a sidewalk there, and it looks like we're, building to nowhere. I love it when they finally do get connected. And sometimes it takes 2 years, sometimes it takes 20 years, but eventually they get connected. But to rob Peter to pay Paul, I think is a mistake for the developer to do that. Because Where do we stop? We're talking about sidewalks, but again, my rationale is, so, you know, this road, we come up with a standard that needs 24 feet of pavement. If the town's in trouble where my street can't get paved, new pavement, that we say, hey, Mr. Developer, you know, you need 30 feet, we're gonna change it to 30 feet. But if you wanna put 24 feet in, that money you would've spent on the 6 feet is gonna go towards paving another road someplace else in town. Where do we stop with that? I don't think it's right to say
Hey, John,
to a developer that you gotta
John,
pay
may I
for
ask
something
a
over
question?
there.
I think it's the developer's
It's my
If it's
turn to
important
talk.
for the town to have sidewalks on Russell's Mills roads, then the taxpayers should pay that, all the taxpayers, not the developer off of Reed Road, or Tucker Road, or wherever it may be, that's 3 miles away. That's just my
Okay,
feeling and philosophy.
We have in the past, and we've done a number of them on the OSRDs, where we have waived the sidewalks. So that's why I was asking how many house lots, because I know we have waived sidewalks, and we have.
Yes, I don't
In
disagree
those
with that.
cases
It
where
doesn't-
we
it
have
doesn't say-
waived sidewalks, that's where, if we feel we're gonna waive sidewalks in this subdivision, it has maybe 4 house lots, and it's a cul-de-sac a half a mile in, no one's gonna use it but those 4 houses, and they don't really want it, or the developer doesn't wanna do it. That's where we should be able to set up this fund. On these places where we say, yes, we will waive the sidewalk for you because it fits. Those are the places where, let's get a revolving fund for the, or whatever they call it, for sidewalks to be put somewhere else where they are important. We can do it both ways.
But we waive a lot of things, and without serious consideration. So again, do we do that to every standard we waive, that we tell the developer now, okay, we waive a drainage issue, or waive the street trees?
No, this is something that's done in other communities.
This
We're not waiving sewer issues and water issues and
No,
that type of
but
thing.
there are a lot of things we waive. Do we now set a standard where everything that gets waived, you gotta pay it forward someplace
No,
else?
we can't do that. You have to go by standards that is allowed in other communities and stuff like that.
No,
You know,
you're setting up, you know.
No, I
Why can't,
feel we
you know,
can
once
do
you
it.
start the ball rolling, what's the stop? A planning board
because
from
those
saying-
aren't standards you can waive. We can't waive
No, I'm saying
sewer
the
issues
standards,
and water
there are
issues and-
standards we can waive. I'm just talking about, I know we can't waive everything. There are requirements in our regulations that we have the right to waive.
So you have,
What you're saying on
you have in your,
sidewalks only, let me finish, the sidewalks only, if we waive that, they're gonna put it. When, we're gonna do that for streetlights, when we waive streetlights, we have the right to do that. When we waive,
We
there are
don't build
other,
streetlights anymore.
well, we did, you know, at one time.
so
There
your
are other
your
requirements that we can
regulation does
waive.
not have a number, does not have a minimum or a maximum number in this particular case. It
thought
just
it
says,
did.
the planning board may require pedestrian sidewalks and bike paths to be paved. Public or private land, it talks about, depending on the size of the proposed development or the need for pedestrian circulation. So, I mean, I think it's something that has to be debated within the planning board members. Dave has given his opinion on it.
Right, yeah, we shouldn't
He has
waste your time
expressed, so
on
I think that
debating
this conversation can happen later
Our
on.
opinions, yeah, we've heard your, yeah, we're wasting your time.
Again, I just want to
No,
stress.
you're not wasting our time. I think Dave's
No, we're
points
wasting
are
Dave's time.
valid.
Yeah, no, again, just to sum it up, we'd like to build sidewalks. What we find is that grant money is typically more readily available when it's what they call a gap sidewalk, meaning we're connecting 2 sidewalks. That's usually where we get grant money. You know, Dartmouth Street, Milton Street was a good example because we had sidewalks on Potter Street, Sharp Street, and we also had them out on Slocum Road. And so we got $200,000 grant toward the sidewalks on Milton Street, but obviously we had to come up with the balance of the money, the town.
You have to come up with
So-
you have to come up with some, not matching funds, but. a
Yeah, so,
percentage,
you know,
yeah.
again, we'd asked for $440,000, and they gave us $200,000.
Right.
But that helped, you know, so every little bit helps in stretching the dollars to do more projects. So, again, I will get you the complete street
Yeah, your list.
priority list of sidewalks, and you'll see that, you know, we're sticking to it, and we've already knocked off 3 or 4. This year, we're doing Cove Road, from Dartmouth Street to the New Bedford line, both sides, concrete sidewalks, granite street trees, similar to what we did on Rogers Street. all the way down, and that sets the stage for us to start doing those residential subdivisions. This year, we'll be doing about 90% of the area between Dartmouth Street and Cove Road to the north of Cove Road, that whole section of Bliss Corner to the New Bedford line. We'll wrap that up this year. I think we have 2 small streets down there we won't finish, and they'll be part of next year's plan.
Yeah, that's an important area to
And then we'll start up
do.
at the top and start working our way down between Rogers and Cove Road, right down to Buttonwood.
Yeah,
So-
because the number of people that walk down that road to go to the dike, to
Yep.
take, to walk around there, or to go to ice cream down there,
Yep.
yeah.
So we're
That's
doing
great.
that,
That's
that's
a really
nice.
good
And
idea.
we were able, because of the width of Cove Road, we were able to include street trees on that, so it should be nice. So I'll get you the complete.
So what do you
street
do in
list.
that instance? It's obviously you don't have the trees are going
So
very
the-
close to pavement and sidewalk.
Yeah, so the trees we
What are
use-
you're using a different species of trees?
There are
so-
different species of trees, similar to what we did in the village. They only grow about 14 feet. They're more of a flowering type tree. We have a.
So there are other things we could do.
Yeah, well, again,
Because
if you have
those
underground
trees are
utilities, you
growing
don't have
closer than a
wires up
40-foot
above.
right-of-way.
People you'd like to have mature trees over, 30 or 40 years. You love nice, big trees. When we deal with wires, on Cove Road, there were wires on both sides of the road, so we've incorporated, a species that only grow 14 or 15 feet tall.
Like the
So
one,
they come right up
yeah,
under
the ones on
wires.
Dartmouth Street that would go, they're planted.
On what street?
On Dartmouth Street?
Dartmouth Street, we did the same thing.
Yeah.
Those are more of a short, small.
Yeah, because I noticed those and I went, those aren't growing very tall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They'll take, they've been in a couple of years, and they had a tough first year, because we
Mm.
planted them in the spring, late spring, so we're watering them every day.
Okay.
Lorianne, may I make one comment?
Go ahead. Yep.
I just want to congratulate Dave and his team for what they're doing on repairing areas of existing neighborhoods where there's existing people, existing houses, existing traffic. Putting our money and effort into that kind of thing is so much better for the town than bulldozing a green hayfield or tearing down a forest. It's just, Dave is on the right track. We gotta, as a planning board, get to supporting him and put more attention into that stuff, less attention into developers.
All right?
Enough said.
Okay, lots with zero frontage, not allowing SORD subdivisions. Was that?
No, that was just a question, I think, within the engineers. We understand the benefits of OSRD when you're saving open space. The question was, and again, it's out of our jurisdiction, but we tend to ask questions about legal frontage. I mean, I know even on an A&R lot, you need legal frontage, and how do you get legal frontage on a lane or an easement, a driveway easement? We're just wondering how that works.
So I was part of the planning board when we looked at it and developed that and passed the town meeting and passed the muster of the Attorney General. So I know one of the things when we were looking at OSID, we wanted the developer to have complete flexibility. If he was gonna give up 50% of the land to open space, then allow him the complete flexibility, and that was zero frontage.
Yeah.
So apparently, the Attorney General, Town Council,
Yeah.
reviewed that before that got adopted. Our town attorney, after it got adopted at town meeting, there was no problems with that. And I think there were other towns that were doing the same thing, an OSID type concept, so, and it became a huge success once we developed that OSID bylaw.
Question on, so you went and you proposed zero frontage or a reduction of frontage?
I thought it was a reduction of frontage.
No, because
It's a reduction of frontage.
the
No,
bylaw reads that together with reduced lot area, frontage, setback, and lot coverage requirements. So the setbacks weren't reduced to zero. The area wasn't reduced to zero. The lot coverage requirements weren't reduced to zero, but a lot of the lot frontage.
Frontage was
were
reduced to zero.
Zero.
And that was done purposely to allow them more flexibility, less pavement, less road width, so that's what the thought was.
And
when we
the
developed.
zero frontage went to the Attorney General?
Yes, oh yeah. Right,
Or
yes.
a reduction? Because the state Massachusetts subdivision control law states that if a town doesn't have a minimum, that a minimum of 20 feet frontage is required.
Does it? What? Wait. I'm not,
So it requires
The state-
20
the
feet.
state-
of
ADL
minimum.
chapter 41, section 81L.
it has to, it has to have 20 feet?
That's what,
Yeah,
The state.
I'm just,
yeah.
So-
So, we were just looking at creating a kind of a consistent bylaw when you're looking at the reduction of frontage. So if you're still creating a right-of-way, whether it's a common driveway and you say you need a 35 or a 30-foot right-of-way, or a 35-foot right-of-way with a minimum of 18-foot roadway, whether it's gravel or paved, and the lots have contiguous frontage, and maybe a couple lots have 20 to make them work, it's a lot easier to kind of fathom than lots with no frontage.
So similar to your service roads and your connector roads, do you have published right-of-way widths for your private driveways? Is it a varied?
I don't know off the top of my head
Yeah.
if the easement has to be X amount. I don't have the standard in front of me, but.
I mean, we have this private residential lane, which is 16 feet
On a 40-foot right-of-way?
on a 40-foot right-of-way.
Oh, that's the width of the.
Yeah, the right-of-way.
He's talking about the easement width. I don't know what that.
Yeah, that's the same
Yeah,
thing,
okay.
easement, right-of-way.
There is no kind of common width that's required. You know, it's basically the width of the traveled lane that's approved. That usually goes along with the OSRD.
Yeah, we could look at that to make sure.
We,
So-
you know, we have one up,
I don't think we've ever, I don't recall that, so if we say it's a 16-foot wide common driveway, you're saying the easement's only 16 feet?
no, well, currently, that's about what it is, I think. You know, a lot of
I don't know
times.
if that's true, but
The
I'm
easement's
willing to
either
look
the traveled way or a little wider than the traveled way.
I think it has to be wider than to what extent, I don't know, off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I think, but that could have been something we overlooked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sometimes it
always
just
thought if
goes-
we had 16 feet, we had 2 feet on
Yeah,
either
I thought
side.
2 feet, maybe,
I thought.
The easement, so,
And sometimes we see the easements go directly through the middle of a number of lots.
yep, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what an easement does. you
Yeah.
know.
And that's great, that's an easement, that's an access easement. But that still doesn't, I guess, relinquish the requirement for frontage.
Frontage.
No, that's already been, that's already part of the OSID standards, you don't have to have frontage. So just
Reduction.
because there's a common driveway easement, that doesn't say, okay, that automatically is your frontage, you don't have to have
Right,
frontage.
similarly, if you take an estate lot, which
Yep.
has a required amount of square footage with 50 feet of frontage required,
Mhm.
can also have a common driveway for access for
Yep.
multiple estate lots,
Yep.
but it still has frontage.
So,
I guess the question we had is, like other types of developments, you have minimum lot size, minimum frontage, and we're just curious as to why an OSRD lot wouldn't have some type of minimum frontage requirement.
because what you would get, so I was I was on the board when we developed OSID, I was around when we developed estate lots. So estate lots are, 3 times the area with just 25% of the frontage, so you need 200 feet of frontage in this zone. We're saying you can put 50 feet of frontage, but you're gonna have 3 times the area. So what we saw of, and we see this all the time when you have any kind of requirement, where the frontage is 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 feet, or whatever it is, you get these creative engineers who you get these convoluted lots that are perfectly legal. I mean, I worked at Tibbetts, I've worked in engineering firms where I drafted plans that, we looked at the standards, okay, I gotta have X amount of feet of frontage, and to meet all these requirements, you end up with this crazy looking lot, wastes a lot of land, you end up with a tiny building envelope over here in the corner because you're gonna meet all these setback and all these standards, versus the OSID allows the developer now all the flexibility, no frontage, So you don't end up with these convoluted lots. If we have a minimum of 20 feet, 50 feet or whatever, we just end up with these convoluted, mostly flag-shaped lots where you get this long, you know, you see them now with all the estate lots. I think estate lots are great, but we've created a lot of these flag lots, I call them,
Yeah.
that are really narrow with a small building envelope in the back, and they're just crazy looking, and it wastes so much land. And through the OSID, we've been able to take, you know, subdivisions that would have developed 20 acres, 30 acres, develop less than half of it. Just about in every instance, we always get more than 50% of.
Do they back out wetlands before they do that?
I'm sorry?
Do they have to show the upland development?
Yes, there's
Yeah.
upland requirements and so forth, and the planning board gets to choose where that open space is. You know, they'll come in with a concept plan, but if the planning board doesn't agree with, hey, wait a minute, you know, you're taking all the good land and you're giving the town all the crap. You
A
know,
good idea was on,
you-
a good
you can't do
example is
that.
on Tucker
But-
Road, we got that front
Yeah.
land saved.
With
And
that
the backland.
flexibility, you don't end up with these crazy lot shapes, and you waste land when you do that. When you create those standards, all you're doing is wasting land in those pinch points that we have to create to meet the standards. I mean, it's nice to say that you got the square lot that has no impedance to it, but every lot isn't square. It has wetlands, it has this, and that's why you get these crazy shaped lots. And if you look at OSIDs, not to say that some of them aren't crazy, most of them are pretty, you know, nice building envelopes that are very reasonable for homeowners, and you don't end up with a lot of wasted land.
Again,
So
we were
that
just,
was the thought
we
process.
realize it's not our jurisdiction, we were just curious how that.
Yeah, no, that
how
was the thought
came
process, I know,
about.
when we developed it. was
And,
to-
At least this way you understand where we came from.
Right.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about them and
Yeah.
Yep.
about the lack of frontage.
Okay.
I just don't see how zero frontage relates to reduced frontage.
Well, because you can either do all. So it's, you can have zero frontage or reduced frontage. So the standard in for that district, whatever you're in, your OSID is in
But that
single
doesn't,
residence A, single residence B. The flexibility says you can reduce your frontage or reduce it down to zero. It's just flexibility.
but there are still setbacks related to those lots, correct?
For a building envelope, yes.
So if you have zero frontage, how do you maintain the front setback?
That's a good question.
You could call, you just call one side a front, the other side's, I guess it's up to the developer where they want to put their
But
front.
you don't have frontage on a public or private.
I don't know if I don't have the OSID in front of, I don't know if we have a front setback on an OSID. So I think it's probably just a setback that's standard for all sides.
I'm guessing that John is thinking that the front setback gets redefined by the new roadway, the private roadway.
No, I don't think we have
I
a
agree-
front
I agree
setback
with
in
your point.
OSID standards. It's
Zero
just
doesn't have a front
one
setback.
setback from all sides probably is what's in OSID.
Right, so if you have zero, so let's say it's a 5-foot setback from all sides, front, side, and rear. How do you comply with a front setback? if you
There
don't
is
have
no front, that's what I'm saying. It's all sides, so there's no front, side, rear. I
So
believe
how does that comply with other lots in town that require front setback?
other lots, if you're doing a conventional
Christine,
subdivision.
do we have a, don't we
Or an
have
A and R, there is
chart?
frontage, because you have to have frontage.
Wouldn't you want a front setback from your lane, from your driveway
Don't we have a
lane?
chart for OSRD?
I would think so.
This is the chart for the A and R.
Again, I'd have to look at the
I
OSI,
mean,
but I don't think we
I-
put one.
Yeah. I'm just curious, I mean, if,
No,
You
you
come
can't,
in
have-
and-
John, you cannot have zero frontage on an OSRD.
What do we say?
Non-street setback structures is 10, setbacks from driveways and parking spaces are 5, lot frontage is 100.
That's not true, that's not.
This
an
is
OSI.
dimensional requirements, OSR, though this is an A and R plan, that's not what I want.
OSID is,
Yeah, but that's not for OSID subdivision
No.
plans. It's just A&R.
Open space. I know we have a chart somewhere, I was almost positive we put a chart in here.
So, why is that a DPW concern?
No, we were just
They had a
curious.
question.
You know, we talk, engineers talk about things all the time, you know, we're like,
It's not our jurisdiction.
what's the
but it's-
setback from the lane? How do you know where to put your house? You just bought a house on a private lane with 6 lots, and, you know, 3 of the neighbors are set back 50 feet from the driveway, and you don't wanna, you know, you want, put your house right up on the driveway. How do
Then
you?
you don't put it there, you put it someplace else. It's.
No, I'm
again,
just curious
Flexibility
is-
for the developer not to have to follow these crazy standards that create these really obscure lots. Go away. We get, you know, and when you look at an OSID, they've got great building envelopes. Now, you can build an OSID with, you know, houses 500 feet away if that's what you want, or houses 50 feet away. It all depends how you want it to look and who you're marketing. But, you know, there are people find that would build a house 15 feet away from a neighbor. I wouldn't want it, but it happens all the time. Some people are fine with that, you know.
Yeah, I guess,
And
I guess.
the OSID offered that flexibility.
Our thought was if you, you know, the developer's not building a house, you buy a lot at an OSRD, and all your neighbors are set back, you set your house back 50 feet, so don't all your neighbors, and the lot next door to you sells, and that buyer decides he's not gonna have a setback, he's gonna put his house right on the, you know, 15 feet back. It's
Why
sort
would
of,
be weird? You know, you gotta
well,
understand the
you already
standards.
built your house, that's,
Huh?
I guess, why you have zoning, to
Right.
protect, you know, and have some, but anyhow, again, that's really outside of our jurisdiction, but thanks for explaining it to us.
I think it's a good point that we ought to take up as we think about how to change that rule for the better, to be consistent with the kinds of concerns. We don't want what looks like gerrymandered voting districts, which are the terrible lots John was describing. And we also don't want the kinds of things Dave was worried about. I think we should change the rules till we sort it out.
Just going down the list here, I think we talked about the street trees, talked about sureties. Would you like an
So-
update on the
So
Paynear
one more
Bridge?
one thing about the street trees, what do you want them to be, the distance, like, do you want them inside of the property line instead, or?
So,
You gotta
I
send
know
us
you
some
said
standards.
wider road, right of way.
I think
but-
ideally, you know, if we had the 50-foot right-of-way.
That'll solve it.
We would want them pushed back away from the right-of-way, I mean, from the edge of pavement, you know, the
Right.
travel way. So there would be a grass strip, a sidewalk, and then behind the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the front property line of that lot you're in front of, that's where the street tree would go.
So you should probably give us a standard.
We're gonna do
How
that.
many
We have
feet
a
you
couple of
want it
different
from
ones. We'll send them
the
over
right
for
of
your
way?
review.
But as you know, a lot of times because of wetlands and so forth, you can have a 50-foot right-of-way, 24 feet of pavement, but yet the road hugs one side of the easement. So we need
Yeah.
the distance. You guys want the street trees from the pavement and from, because they still have to meet that requirement. So there's no sense in
Yeah.
saying, hey, you've got to put it 2 feet off the easement line, and then the developer puts a road 4 feet off that easement line because he's trying to get around some wetlands.
Yep.
That doesn't do anything for your issue. So we got to have 2 setbacks, one from edge of pavement and one from the edge of the right-of-way, where you want that tree.
So we have a couple of scenarios we'll work on. We'll send them down.
Okay.
And that's an easy standard, you know,
Yep.
just throw in as a requirement.
Go to that page.
All right. So, last one's the Paynear Bridge?
Yeah, so Steve Taylor had requested that we get an update of that
Sure.
particular item.
Yep, so, let's see, over the past year, we've been working on a comprehensive evaluation of the bridge. And we looked at every component of the bridge, mechanical, electrical, structural, and looked at what we've been historically spending every year to maintain the bridge, and then we looked at options. And so I'll just go to the executive summary. The news is not good, and I do plan on presenting this to the select board. I already have presented it to the Board of Public Works. So there are three options: continue to do what we're doing, which, and Tim and I were talking about this today. We've recently spent quite a bit of money on the electrical upgrades. We shut the bridge down a couple of weeks ago for that reason, for about a week and a half. So that's one option. Just continue to do what we do with a bridge that was built in 1935, that we can't get parts for if any of the major components go, they go. The next option is do a full rehabilitation of the bridge, meaning you take the bridge out, you do a full rehabilitation, upgrade the mechanical, electrical, and you put the bridge back in. And then the third option is to replace the bridge. So the difference in cost between the rehabilitation and the replacement is about, there's not a lot of money, well, it's a lot of money. It's, but comparatively, it's about $1.7 million to just replace it new. And that estimate's $19 million. So that's where we are. Very difficult to find money for this type of bridge through the state, because it's, it all comes down to, when the state looks at a bridge, it rates a bridge, they look at traffic volumes and detour lengths. And because we have very low traffic volumes compared to other bridges in the district, and because the detour length is only 7 miles, which may sound like a lot, but it's really not, the bridge never ranks very high on the priority list for funding. It was the same reason why the causeway didn't rank high for funding, because for the same reasons. And that's
Dave, can I ask you a question about that, please?
Sure.
I want to ask a question. I don't know if you guys saw a copy of a letter that I wrote in 2018 about this, but just to repeat one little piece of it, everything you just said was completely correct, but it's a state mistake. It's not our problem in Dartmouth or your problem or anybody else, but the state made a huge mistake by ranking us 296th out of 800 and change, because we are one of about a half a dozen to 12 bridges. I don't know the exact count, but I know it's less than 15 in the entire state that are required to be kept in the open position for boats due to federal maritime laws if the bridge isn't working. So we should, by definition, be ranked in the top 15, no matter what our traffic is. Car traffic and detour things, that's all very well that the state does that, but those are a lot of people who've never been in a boat and they've never gone to sea. So our thing should have been ranked very differently. I wrote a letter to our state reps and state senators 2 years ago about that. Never got an answer, which is their problem, not yours. But the fact is, our bridge should be ranked completely differently. We have a really good case to make that we're one of the bridges that really ought to be replaced. There is another such bridge in South Bristol, Maine, which I referred to in my letter, and if you don't have a copy, I'll make sure you get one.
Yeah,
But
could you send it to me?
There are things that are already done that we could buy and import and install in less time than we're talking about the problems that we have. And I'm really worried that our bridge is going to fail us, and then we're going to have this beautifully redone causeway to nowhere if we don't do something about it. And I feel that it's the planning board's role to do the proper planning for the future, which is way more important than the width of a given sidewalk. This is a really critical thing that affects the whole town.
No, I agree, and it's a good point. You're dealing with two different entities. Obviously, the federal law and the Coast Guard dictates keeping the bridge in the open position for maritime use. In the event it's out of commission.
That's right.
And you're right. I don't think Mass DOT considers that at all when they look at our bridge, because they're
You're
looking at
absolutely
traffic
right.
volumes and
It's
detours.
never occurred to them.
Yeah.
But it
That's a
should
good
have,
point.
and we should have made it occur to them. That's our job, is to make sure they understand that.
Yep. So,
So, Dave, question, is to Steve's last point. What jurisdiction does the planning board have on the roadway, on the bridge, on the causeway? What business is it of ours?
Yeah, I don't, I think it's a DPW function, but what I've found over the years, it's good to have support from other entities, you know, whenever you do any
Which we
project,
do.
and you know,
Absolutely.
most recently, Cross Road, for example, we've got that on the tip, the first phase of Cross Road, and we get letters of support from other agencies, so I think whenever you have an agency that can support your project, that goes a long way. And in most grant applications, you're particularly with Mass DOT, you're required to get those letters of support. So, yeah, I think whatever anyone can do to help, you know.
So letters
Collectively.
in support, but as far as
Yeah.
planning in,
But Kevin, can I answer your question directly? I think your real
you can give me
question-
your opinion on them, but I don't think you can answer the question.
Absolutely. Kevin, this is my opinion, but if we were called the Planning Review Committee for other people's plans in Dartmouth, I would agree with you 100%. But we are the planning board for the future of Dartmouth. We're in charge of the 10-year master plan for the future of this town. That's not to do with the radius of some developer's sidewalk in a given subdivision. We're responsible for the entire 10-year master plan for the town. That would certainly include the bridge. Now, if somebody wants to redefine the planning board as the planning review committee, then I agree with you, but we really need to talk about that big picture stuff.
So I did provide Lori with copies of the letter just before the meeting, so she will give it to Dave and his
Oh,
staff.
okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, yeah.
From the 2018 thing. I
So,
think in the past, like Dave says, on a number of occasions, they reach out if they're going after grant money or even other departments, if they're doing certain things like that, they do reach out to the planning board or to the planner and they request a letter of support or whatever. So usually I talk to you about it and then I write the letter. So that's typically how it's handled. We do that. I will continue to do that because I think that's a good policy. I think it's important that the planning board work with all of the other departments, and if they're going after something that's a positive for the town, whatever department it is, that we move forward in that direction. So if we can be of assistance with this particular item, you know, I mean, by all means, you should reach out to us and then I can draft something for you.
sure, so moving forward, I plan to present this to the select board soon. And,
Is there a chance of getting this on the, no? What department would the funds come out of for this?
What funds?
Yeah, where would they, state or federal?
For the causeways, it was a combination of state and federal.
Right, what about the bridge itself?
So most bridges have this, they have that accelerated bridge program
Right.
in Massachusetts. So typically, bridges aren't funded through the tip, and that's a problem. So now, again, you're competing with those other, I want to say the number was 536 bridges, because I had the denial letter. 'Cause
The number was over 800, Dave.
in the
number was
district,
over
yeah, and I think we were ranked
596.
536 from the top down, out of 800. I have the letter in my office, because we have, on 2 prior occasions, we have requested the PNF, the project need
Right.
form, through the TIP. And initially, actually on 3 occasions, the first time I had a meeting with the state afterwards, and they told me that, you know, the funding just wasn't there. The second time we applied, I got the letter explaining where we stood, you know, in the pecking order, and it wasn't good news. And then the final, the third request, they didn't respond. So, yeah, it's a tough one. It's gonna be difficult.
It's a difficult situation, but the most important thing is the only bridge in our neighborhood that should be ahead of us is the Route 6 bridge in New Bedford. That is legitimately ahead of us as a federally navigable waterway bridge with more traffic than we have, both by cars and boats. But we would be the next bridge in the region, and the state should be taking it seriously, and I'm not sure who's gonna do it, but somebody among us has to get to the state and convince them of that. And it's not your fault, it's not the planning board's fault. If we had a prescient leader of the select board, maybe they would be in a better position, or a town manager, but somebody in Dartmouth has got to make that case to the state. Our bridge should be number 2 or 3, not number 296. New Bedford is ahead of us, that's clear.
Well, I'll look forward to getting the letter, and then,
So was
you
it
know,
born and,
yeah. And, you know, we can continue to put the request in. That's the first step in funding, is the project need form.
right.
And then they evaluate it, the committee evaluates it.
I'm really sorry I didn't send you the letter before. I sent the letter to 2 state representatives and a state senator, and I assumed, because it was a state problem, that they would deal with it, but they should have put it to the people in Dartmouth at the time. This was 2018, over a year and a half before I ever ran for the planning board, but nothing happened. You and I were both at the Serpent meeting in that summer of 2018, where we discussed why the causeway had money and the bridge didn't, which was shocking to a lot of us who need to drive over the bridge, and it was closed for 2 years. We'd like to see it not closed for 2 years again while we fix it. And in the meantime, I've learned about a bridge in South Bristol, Maine, which you can bring in on a barge and install it. I'm not trying to trivialize it. It won't be a simple problem, but it wouldn't be a 2-year problem. But we need to get the state to realize that we've got a different problem than they think we have. They're building bridges over rivers and streams in the central part of the state, and they're only dealing with cars and detours. We're dealing with federally navigable waterways, and they don't understand that. So we need to make that point to them.
So the accelerated bridge replacement program in Massachusetts, I went up to, I believe it was Beverly. Anyhow, it was the same bridge that we have in Paden Aram dimensionally, but instead of cars, it had 2 railroad tracks, and it was the
Right.
it was the commuter rail coming in from the north
Right.
into Boston.
Exactly.
And ironically, the firm that we hired to do this report were the design engineers for that bridge. They did that in 14 days, and that's what they do. They take a bridge replacement, the bridge is built, you know, in a shipyard somewhere, it's brought up on barge, they bring in a crane, they lift the old one out, and then they spend a week or so prepping the center pier,
Right.
and then they put the new one on. And the goal in this project would be to be able to qualify the existing center pier to take the load of the new bridge, because the new bridge would be dramatically less weight than the old bridge. And by engineering judgment, they think they can.
And that would be a really great solution. That's the best thing I've heard.
Yeah, that's the solution that this
Really good
price
idea.
reflects, the 19 million. It's not a 2-year project. This is a, you know, if they did it in 14 days for the commuter rail, they were talking about a month or so they could do this.
That would be a
Yeah.
brilliant
All the
solution.
prep work is done while the
Exactly
bridge
what
is
we
operational. It's just that platform where they're putting the new bridge in that needs to be addressed.
Like they're doing highway bridges now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so they do that.
Same way General Patton built the bridges in Italy in the Second World War. It's music to my ears, Dave. This is what we should be talking about.
Yeah,
I mean, the problem is we live in Dartmouth and we think this bridge is the most important one in the state. And Bourne thinks their bridge is the most important one in the state. And Beverly thinks theirs is the most important one in the state. And the state has this criteria, which they go by, and it's got a checklist, and yes, 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 no, 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 no. And that's where you fit on this chart.
You're right, Lori, but we should be number 15, not number 296 by that very criteria that you're talking about. So you're absolutely right. That's how the process works. But we have a federally navigable waterway outside our harbor. Most of the other bridges do not, and that's how the process ought to work. So you're basically right.
Anything else? Any
no,
other?
thank you.
I think we can get some of these things, write some of them up, get them
Yep.
to Christine.
Yeah, and we'll get you what we owe you as well.
Yep, and I think working with our developers in the future and the engineers, we can get them on track to say, this is the procedure and this is the way it's gonna work. And if something gets before you and you can't do it in a timely fashion because they're not giving you information in a timely fashion, just let Christine know.
All right.
And she'll tell us, we just haven't.
Yep. I thought it was
We
a
don't have the
very,
information, we cannot vote on it yet.
very productive meeting.
Yep,
Yes,
thank you.
I think this all,
Yeah.
Thank you, Christine, for putting it
anytime we
together.
can
Yep.
communicate like
Don't
this,
vote on it till we have the info.
bounce off ideas, and I think it's a good thing. We may not always agree, and, you know, the
Yeah.
planning board, developing zoning bylaws is a lengthy and difficult process to get. 5 members to agree to some changes, and then to go through the public hearing process, and we send out to a bunch of reviewers, you folks, engineers, a lot of people in town, we ask for comments, and then to go to a public hearing, and then ultimately to get that passed at town meeting is a very difficult process.
I don't envy you.
It's not done in a vacuum, so I don't always remember the reasons why we did some of the things we did, but some of them I do, but sometimes it's just, you know.
At the time, that's what we thought was best.
That's the only way we could have done it,
Yeah.
but anyway.
And you know,
It's much appreciated when we at least get some feedback.
Yeah.
right.
And if we can accommodate you, you know, we can try to accommodate, make the process work better for
Right.
everybody.
All right.
And zoning and subdivision laws are not written in stone. As time changes and you see things, and we just need to keep up with, you know, what's going on. So we change, you know, and for town meeting to think, well, just because you voted on this last year, doesn't mean this year we need to change something because we saw something didn't work. It's an evolving zoning and subdivision rules that are, they evolve. And your input's really important, and it's a good meeting.
All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care.
Okay, you can.
Thank you, Lori.
We need a motion to adjourn?
I need a motion on the floor to adjourn.
So moved?
So moved.
Second.
John Souza,
Yes.
Kevin Mello,
Yes.
Steve Taylor,
Yes.
Margaret Sweet. Look, I saw her say
Good
yes.
enough.
Yes, yes.
Lori Miller, yes. The meeting is adjourned.